welcome to our webinar this month, transition planning, looking beyond the high school years. So again, we'll be talking about high school age youth and transitioning beyond high school into adulthood. I am Allison Weist. I am parent trainer with Maine Parent Federation. I have been with the agency since 2017, initially as a family support navigator, which we'll mention at the end, and then for the past 2.5 years as a parent trainer. Like everyone else that works for the agency, I have lived experience. I have a son who's 11 years old with an autism diagnosis. So I have navigated the different systems of care here in Maine with his diagnosis. And again, just Dylan asked me to talk about housekeeping a little bit. So we are in a webinar format. This is a pretty long training, so we're going to try to move quickly through it. But feel free to use the chat box. We have enabled it, and you can put any comments or questions you have in there, and we will we'll tag team and be looking for your questions and answering them as they come. I think that's it. I'll turn it over to Dylan and let Dylan introduce himself.
Yeah, and thank you, Allison. So hi, everyone. I'm Dylan Campbell, and I'm a youth coordinator and parent trainer here at Maine Parent Federation. And I've also been with the agency since around 2017, initially as a youth coordinator, working alongside our Maine schools around self-advocacy, transition planning, and supported decision-making. And really in the last few years, Allison and I have worked closely together, creating and presenting these trainings all throughout the state for our families. So today is really just an overview of taking a look at what transition planning looks like in Maine. We are recording today, and we hope to have this on our website, hopefully by the end of the week or next week. And I did drop a link in the chat box a few moments ago of a previously recorded version of our webinar. But if you also want to download our slides today and a family-friendly version of the booklet that we've created, you can also access it at that link as well. And I'm dropping that in the box again right now, just for the folks that might have joined us. But that's where you can access all of that. We do have our chat box open, so feel free to utilize that. We also have our question and answers enabled as well. So if you have any specific questions or any personal questions, we would ask that you use that. And Allison and I will spend a few moments at the end of the training taking those questions off recording. But just kind of diving into things here as well, I think it's important to note that really what you're hearing from us today is general information for you and your family. We are not a legal services agency, and we do not provide any legal advice or legal representation. So kind of diving into the content today, we're really going to kind of situate it by talking about the transition years. And as we move along, we're going to talk about developing a transition plan. And then as we wrap up today, we're going to talk about some of the services here in Maine and give you some resources to head off with. But really, why are we here? Why are we talking about transition planning? And I think this is a lot of families can relate to this, mine included as well. I think oftentimes our kids, our young people, our siblings, they're growing up a lot faster than we realize and a lot faster than we like. So really the transition years and transition planning is taking a look at what do we need to do to support our young person as they become an adult. So really, how do we know the systems of care and recognize the changes that we need to address? And really what we mean by those systems of care, and that's a term that we might use throughout the day, is really taking a look at not just one service or support, but really an array of services and supports. So like our medical system, our healthcare, our independent living system services, is taking a look at how these systems of care change as our young person becomes an adult, changes from children's services into adult services. And really, these transition years is the time period that we're thinking of this. It's the time when our young person is, they're coming into themselves. They're learning their interests, their strengths, their challenges. They're learning how to communicate that to others, and they're building what their future would like to be for the rest of their life. It's also a time to make mistakes and learn from your mistakes. Because really for all people, all young individuals, transitioning into adulthood is a milestone. But it's also important to recognize that sometimes for our people with disabilities, this milestone can also mean additional areas to be aware of. So really, this is thinking about how do we build in those supports for our young people after high school in the different areas of their education, their employment, and their independent living. So how do we build a plan for how they'll access supports in the future? And this is important because as we mentioned, our young people are aging sometimes faster than we like. And sometimes, the age of 18 approaches around the corner. So really, this is preparing for those changes that occur after the age of 18. And the age of 18 is important because that's when a young person reaches the age of majority, and that's when they're legally considered an adult in the eyes of the government. So it's important to keep in mind that, each person is going to be different, their level of needs, their level of support. So how do we build a plan that not only supports them, but reflects who they are and reflects their personal values? So when we start talking about transition planning, we're talking about a document that's included in the IEP plan, in your IEP program. So under IDEA, which is the federal special education law, schools are required to provide a transition plan by the time a young adult turns 16 or enters ninth grade. Here in Maine, we actually start this process a little bit younger. So you can start this process at the age of 14. So when your young person really starts entering those first years of high school, that's when we should start building this plan, start inviting the additional people to the table that are necessary, and start asking our young person, where do you see yourself in the future? Where do you see yourself living? Where do you see yourself learning? What do you see yourself learning more about? And where do you see yourself working for employment? And like I mentioned, for all young people, transitioning is a milestone, but that milestone also means a significant shift in how those educational and support services are accessed. And Allison will dive into this a little bit more in detail, but really simply put, after aging out of school or graduating, young people are no longer accessing their services through the public school system, Katie Beckett, or the Office of Child and Family Services. Instead, as an adult, if they're still accessing these services, if they're still eligible, they're accessing them through other programs such as Social Security, Maine Care, and the Office of Aging and Disability Supports. So it's a shift in the services and how they're provided to our young people. And these systems aren't automatic, so it's important for families to know and be aware of what this upcoming change can look like. And there's a couple of metaphors that Allison and we've come across. And we hear families, telling their experiences, and that I think our own families relate to as well. But the goal is to avoid what we call the cliff. And the cliff it's when those services change. And imagine being a family or of a young person approaching this, and you're unaware of what is to come, what happens at the age of 18, and how these services change. It can be a cliff for families where you're, kind of gathering at the last minute trying to figure out how do we access, what do we do next? And this is because for our young people, public schools are required to find and identify students who need services when they're in grade school. However, that's not true for post-secondary services or adult services. So when they're going into, higher education, into college, it's on the young person to identify their disability and reach out to the support office. As an adult, they're accessing those other service programs rather than what they were accessing when they were younger. It's often like there's no direct pipeline or pathway for families. The other metaphor, which I think I like a little bit more, is that families are often finding themselves sewing together a patchwork of community services, job supports, post-secondary opportunities, as well as the protections that they have from the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's like families are really kind of putting together this quilt of what works best for them to really meet their needs. And really at the core of all of this for our young people is helping them build the skills to be able to know that, hey, this isn't working for me. I need to ask for support. And it's about identifying their interests, their strengths, weaknesses, and challenges, and then communicating those to other people. So really, while the law determines transition plans, we always like to say here at MPF, it's never too early to start implementing the self-advocacy skills. So really, even as a young age, maybe the law tells you when to invite a young person to their transition plan, but maybe a young person could build their self-advocacy skills by joining their IEP plan at a much younger age. I think it really helps them understand what this program is about, how it supports them. It also helps them build those skills to be able to verbalize and communicate those to other people as well. So really, even at a young age, we can always start practicing self-advocacy. And I think that's one of the biggest roles of our families in preparing our young people for adulthood is helping them learn and build those skills.
Thanks, Dylan. So Dylan did a nice sort of introduction to, again, thinking about transition from high school into adulthood. For families, it can be a really confusing time. Again, as Dylan mentioned, trying to piece together services, and again, supporting our young person in utilizing their voice or whatever way that they communicate so that their needs are being met. So thanks, Dylan. We're going to shift a little bit and talk a little bit about laws around transition. Because again, it's important to know these, and I'm guessing that probably a lot of people in the room are familiar with some of what I'm going to be talking about. But again, there are laws that ensure that all children, regardless of disability, are entitled to that FAPE or free and appropriate public education, meeting their unique needs, and then also preparing them for further education, employment, and independent living. Next slide, Dylan. So these laws, again, are overseen by the federal law as well as our state regulations. So federally, special education laws are regulated by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA. And in our state, MUSER, the state Maine's Unified Special Education Regulations. So again, these two agencies oversee and allow for special education for our young person, including transitioning. So in the state of Maine as well, MUSER being our special education law, we meet or we exceed the expectations and laws set forth by the federal law, IDEA. And in the MUSER handbook, if you're not familiar, hopefully you are. It's a little light reading, but the regular text in the book is the federal law or IDEA, and then the italicized text and language is where Maine exceeds, meets, or exceeds, excuse me, the federal education requirements. So, and this is currently, I know that we're going to be looking at MUSER, or the state's going to be looking at MUSER regulations, and there may be some changes coming, which we will keep families up to date on that. But currently, the way that it's written, the regular text is IDEA, and the italicized is where Maine exceeds those laws. Also important for families to know, and I think most families are aware of this now, but IDEA was extended until the age of 22 now. It used to be 21. So now under federal law, a child or a young person is entitled to receive that free and appropriate public education, regardless of the disability, up until the age of 22, their 22nd birthday. So again, guessing many people are familiar, an IEP or an individualized education program is developed for all public school children who are in need of that special education curriculum, service, and accommodations. Again, it's mandated by the federal law, IDEA. This also includes the transition plan that we're going to be diving into and talking about. Sorry, Dylan, are you multitasking over there? Dylan's doing the slides for me. Thanks, Dylan. So one of the other important things to know as well, so we talk about an IEP, IDEA, a student graduating or aging out at the age of 22. Once that happens, then FAPE has been met, that free and appropriate public education has been met. So that's why it's really important for families and individuals, young people, to know about Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. That is what follows an individual beyond high school into adulthood, into employment or post-secondary education, into independent living, and it allows for those accommodations and modifications that they may need. It's mandated by the Americans with Disability Act. So again, once IDEA FAPE has been met, then the protections are mandated through the 504 Rehabilitation Act. And again, why it's so important, and I'm probably jumping ahead and I apologize, but why it's so important for a young person to learn self-advocacy skills and how to speak up and ask for the accommodations and modifications that they need. And I'm talking about it. Thanks, Dylan. So again, after we have met IDEA, it no longer applies after graduation of high school or aging out. So Section 504 is where those protections continue throughout the individual's life. So Dylan touched on this before. In Maine, the transition to adulthood also means a change in the provider of those services. So community services, they transfer from the Office of Child and Family Services, OCFS, to the Office of Aging and Disability Services. So again, a changing of agencies and how those services are provided. Dylan also touched on this. So transition planning, it is required to be in the IEP by the time, again, a student has an IEP and they have a transition plan. The transition plan is required to be part of the IEP by the time the student enters 9th grade or earlier if determined appropriate by the IEP team. And again, Dylan mentioned in Maine, you know, a lot of times we begin at the age of 14. We do hear families say that they haven't heard about transition planning at the age of 14, but it's okay for families to ask about this and to begin having these conversations, inviting people to the table. So again, starting at the age of 14, actually, you know, again, and Dylan mentioned this, starting those conversations, talking about self-advocacy, talking about future interests, goals, all of those things at an early age, again, turns into better outcomes later on. So, and again, a transition plan for each student will look differently. Parents should feel no shame in asking for the planning to begin early. So.
And another, I think, big change that arises with the transition plan is that there's a slightly different focus with your transition plan versus, say, a regular IEP. Really, the goal with the transition plan is to, again, support your young person for their life after high school, after graduating. So to do so, we're really going to think of these 3 different areas. And these are called the 3 domains, and these are required to be in in a transition plan. And really, they address the different areas of education, employment, and independent living. We have an example in just a moment here, but it takes a look at where does a young person see themselves, you know, living? What type of employment do they see themselves, you know, participating in and being happy doing? What type of things do they want to learn about? So where do they see their education? And keeping in mind that that's going to look different. It's not just necessarily post-secondary or college as well. So keeping in mind that this is really, you know, based off their values, their interests, and who they are, and what they want after high school. So this may look a little bit familiar to some folks. If you're already familiar with IEPs, you'll notice that we have our student, parents, regular education teacher. So really the transition team is based off who was on your IEP team, as well as we're going to start inviting some additional people here now. So like Allison had touched base on, you know, really a transition plan is when we're going to start inviting a young person there to talk to the plan, to, you know, share their vision for the future. So really we're going to add them to the team as well, but we're also going to start thinking about vocational rehabilitation. So vocational rehabilitation is it's a program under the Department of Labor Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. And they're a program that really works alongside students to help them find, prepare for, and keep employment. And that's a huge thing for our young people. So we want to make sure that, if possible, we're inviting a vocational rehabilitation counselor to the table by 11th grade or age 16. And again, this can start younger as well. And here in Maine, we actually have what is called pre-employment transition services, which can start at age 14 here in Maine. So really keeping in mind that we're having our IEP team, and now we're adding some additional members that really may be able to benefit our young person. And really, I think one of the biggest benefits of having your young person at the table there is not only that they're able to share their vision, from their point of view, but it's also helping them build the skills. It brings a different perspective to the table, because really it is their future, it's their plan. So any decisions should be based off their values and interests. It's also important to note, just you can add alongside those folks that were just mentioned a moment ago, there's also important to recommend and think about other individuals that may be able to really support your individual. So sometimes this could be other community agencies or support individuals, and they may have some really good insight on your individual. So, maybe keeping them in mind as potential individuals that may be able to join this team. As a best practice, though, we always recommend that any individual that you're bringing, in addition to any IEP team or transition plan meeting, we recommend that you notify the school. On the other hand, if you're ever bringing any legal representation or planning to record the meetings, you must notify the school, as they have the right to do the same or include their own legal representation. Anything to add to that piece, Allison?
No, I think so. I think you got it, Bill. Thanks.
And really, like I had mentioned a moment ago, we're trying to keep in our mind at all times, really, how can we support our individual, throughout these three domains? So really, for each domain, we should identify their goals, the steps to reaching the goals, and what services will be needed or provided to help the individual reach those goals. So we're always trying to think of life after high school under their education, employment, and independent living areas. For folks that have maybe kind of downloaded the booklet, I think this lays it out really nicely in there, and it's a great resource to have as well. And we're not expecting individuals to walk away knowing these roles, from verbatim, but I do want to introduce you to some of the different areas that maybe individuals may be responsible for. So the school, really their role is to help initiate that planning process, but they're also trying to, help provide different services, identifying which services may be available. They're inviting the young person and also helping them prepare to participate and lead those meetings, while they're also helping them identify which different areas, skills, what type of accommodations they might need. And all of this is based off their strengths and interests. And they're also responsible with inviting vocational rehabilitation to the team, and keeping in mind that this plan needs to reflect the student's vision for the future. So really, the school is taking a look at managing what the meeting is. There's also roles that we have as best practices for students and families as well. So some of those best practices for a student is participating in those assessments, and preparing ahead of time. So we have a video that we might leave you with before we leave today, and it talks about a young person and his position in participating in his IEP transition plan. So, some of the roles for the student is really identifying, what can I use for support? How can I be comfortable attending this meeting? How can I share my strengths and weaknesses? How do I need to know about, self-disclosure of my disability? As well as, keeping track of their different goals and participating about their IEP meeting. So really just keeping in mind that the student, they should be involved, and it should always be coming from their vision. It's also important to note that, students can also decline attending their transition meetings. And as we always recommend that they attend and they want to be there, if individuals do decline to attend or be a part of this, it's important for the rest of the team to be aware of what does the student want, what are their values, and how can we replicate that in the decisions that are being made. And then the family, their role is really there to support the process. So support your young person at home, developing those skills in self-advocacy, responsibility, independence, learning how to make decisions and consequences, helping your young person talk about their goals for the future. Where do they see themselves? Talk about different areas of accommodations, as well as also attending the IEP and really monitoring to make sure that the progress is progressing, and be familiar with the different programs that are available, like vocational rehabilitation, adult services, and different community support programs. So generally just supporting and being aware of what is possible and what is out there. And that's the video, but we may not have time for it today. So I am going to leave you with a link
Playing it now.
as you leave. I didn't give it autoplay like that. But I will leave you with that video. And I guess I'll give a quick synopsis of it. But he's a young man that we had worked with around self-advocacy. And he wanted to share this story of specifically how he participated in his transition plan, his IEP, as that. So I'll leave that with you. And that's called Jordan's Story. And it's on our MPF Maine Parent Federation YouTube page. Okay, now I'll hand it to you, Allison.
Thanks, Dylan. And again, if we have time, we'll play it, but I don't know if we will. It's a long training, but it's a fantastic video. And again, just to sort of go back to what Dylan was saying, the takeaway being that our young person is really at the center of their own plan. This is known as person-centered planning. We talk about this when we talk about transition planning, but really thinking creatively. Dylan and I do a lot of work with other agencies and other families, and really thinking creatively and outside of the box. Really, instead of just checking off the box, okay, we're doing person-centered planning, really attempting to engage our young person by asking questions in a different way that maybe they can understand better. I know, again, with my son, he's not at transition age yet, but sometimes the way that questions are worded, instead of things being broad, being more specific, making sure that we're thinking, again, sort of outside of the box, instead of just going to the school and sitting in a room around a table with all the professionals. Maybe we think about how we can engage them in other ways that's more motivating and they're more interested in. So again, just really being strategic and mindful about our young person and what it is that they want and how we can really get them to be involved in their planning. And again, making sure that they're at the center and that their voice and their interests are being heard, and that we're providing them with the opportunities for that. So again, transition services based on multiple different interest inventories. Schools will conduct assessments to see what the students' strengths are, what their interests, talents, and those types of things, what their needs are, what they need support with. And these are some of the areas where we would be looking and assessing a young person at. So in developing the transition plan, and I kind of, I was saying this a couple of slides ago, again, just making sure that the young person really has a say in how we're going to move forward. What is their vision for their future? So really, again, reflecting their values, as Dylan mentioned. And instead of saying like, what do you want to do in the future? Figuring out other ways to reword or rephrase what we're asking. How do they envision their life in a few years? What does that look like to them? What's the picture in their mind? What do they want to learn more about after graduating, instead of just like, what do you want to be? Like, a lot of us don't even know what's available or what's out there. What type of work sounds interesting to you? And what will your living situation look like? So again, really getting them to think about it, having some of those initial conversations, inviting people in that may be able to provide more information or opportunities for them, again, as you're trying to develop a comprehensive transition plan. Age-appropriate transition assessments. I talked a little bit about that, but schools have a variety of formal and informal assessments that, again, can really help guide students in transition planning, gathering that information, again, about strengths, challenges and needs as well. Informal assessments might include things like interviews, career and goal exploration exercises with the young person as well as with their family. More formal assessments might be interest inventories, employment experiences, and aptitude testing. And again, I think, having those opportunities and experiences to try different things as you're going through transition planning, will only help the young person as they move into adulthood. Assessments show areas of interest and areas for growth as well, and really assist them in developing a plan that meets that has goals for all the domains, the three different domains we talked about: education, employment, and independent living.
Yeah, and I think that's just to kind of go back to that piece in a minute. I think that's so important because, our young people and even ourselves sometimes, we don't know what we don't know. And, we don't know what opportunities or employment experiences are available, besides what exists in our small little bubble. So just emphasizing the fact that, exploration is a big piece for our young people. And if not, that might be one of the most important pieces of the transition years is exploring and having the chance to learn, from being there. And this is a quote here that you're seeing on screen that I know Allison, I say it all the time to her, even in jokes, but in reality, I think that this is a really good plan. And for myself, when I first found it, I started, using it as like a mantra in a way. So like a goal without a plan is just a wish. And for me, I feel like that means like if we just have a goal out there without any action steps, how are we actually planning to achieve it? What sets that apart from being a goal versus just a wish? And I think it's those action steps, the goal, the pieces that we can measure the progress on to see that we're actually making steps. So, thinking of our young people, how can we help them build those action steps, identify what it looks like to complete a goal? So really helping them identify what a SMART goal looks like. And this is an acronym that we use all the time as well, but, standing for a specific, measurable, attainable, results-oriented, and time-limited goal. So, helping them build out those goals that can help them actually be tracked. So always thinking about what are the action steps for our young people. So I have a couple examples here for how to maybe write a transition goal. And these are just kind of a broad template, but it takes a look at how do you focus on the three different domains of education, employment, and independent living. So keeping in mind for a young person, there's kind of an implied present level of performance. So there's an implied baseline that we're building these goals off of. So thinking of education. So maybe a potential broad goal for an education could be researching, identifying post-secondary education or training programs aligned with their career interests. Maybe the student will demonstrate understanding of admission requirements, the application process, and financial aid for the chosen programs. So maybe a good education goal is being just understanding the process of how to access that, education institution, Maybe an employment goal, on the other hand, is focused more on engaging in that vocational exploration activity, such as job shadowing, interning, or having those career assessments. So maybe that employment goal is really about building that experience, exploring, and also learning the skills of like writing a resume and completing a job interview. So taking a look at like what that might look like for them. And then independent living, on the other hand, this is of course the goal for all of our young people, is to help them live as independently as possible, whether that's in a dorm, in a home, with a family member, alone, or in a community. But keeping in mind that maybe this is one type of goal, but maybe acquire those essential life skills such as financial management, household tasks, transportation, and self-care. And maybe the student will demonstrate proficiency in managing a budget, utilizing public transportation, maintaining a living space, and personal care tasks. So identifying the different pieces of life that if an individual can show proficiency, and maybe that's how we know that we're making progress towards the goal there. So always keeping in mind those three domains for our young people as we kind of build out and plan. but also recognizing that goals will change as a student has those experiences, as they attend a job shadow, as they, start learning about a certain area. Maybe their minds will change about their interests, and that's okay too. We really need to encourage that, and really keeping in mind that the goals and the conversations that we're having as a freshman are going to be vastly different than the goals we're having as a senior, because they've had those experiences. So they should also be more specific. So maybe in the beginning, towards freshman year, sophomore, maybe a lot of those areas are focused on the exploration. Maybe towards junior and senior year, that's where we're really trying to focus on experiences. So keeping in mind that these goals will change, nothing has to be set in stone, and in fact we should encourage the learning and changing and navigating and adapting to those experiences that our young people had. And I did touch base on this very briefly, but kind of going back to what it looks like at age 18. So by default, in Maine, when an individual reaches the age of 18, that's what we call the age of majority. This means legally they're now an adult, and that also means that comes the transfer of rights from the parents to the individual. So without any other type of conservatorship or guardianship arrangement, an individual is their own guardian. So all the legal authority of that individual becomes theirs, and in the eyes of the government, they're capable of making their own legal and financial choices. So really, to prepare for this, there's a document that is sent out to families when an individual turns 17, and it outlines what does this change look like, and what does that transfer of rights look like for families at the age of 18. So that outlines what that looks like, and really we'll kind of dive into it in just a minute as well, but leading to what are the options for after our individual becomes 18 as well. So these Allison had mentioned, really what transition services will our young adult utilize? This is really determined based off where the student currently is, what their interests are, and this is the information that we use from a lot of those interest inventories that Allison had mentioned a moment ago. So these are services that we should really clearly define within the IEP. So who is providing them, what is being provided, and really all of the information. But what can this look like? So this can include, simply building self-determination and advocacy skills, but it can also be more involved, like connecting a student with vocational rehabilitation, having those job shadowing experiences, and even, having that potential paid employment opportunity. So building those experiences. It can include instructions and trainings on those tasks we just mentioned, like opening a bank account, using public transportation. All of these areas can help a person in their independent living. It can also include, completing applications for adult service eligibility. So that's, if you're familiar, that's quite a big task in its own. So how can we help support them and support as they go through that? And then a huge piece as well for me is helping support and identify their recreational areas. So keeping in mind, that's a huge part of any person's life. That's what makes life fulfilling. So how can we identify clubs and activities that support their interests? And then how can we create the academic goals to support the transition goals? And this is maybe something I should have mentioned at the beginning, but really, I think one of the biggest differences in a transition plan between an IEP is that, now our focus is for how to support the individual for life after high school. So how do we support those education, employment, and independent living goals? Keeping in mind that, maybe next year they're not going to be necessarily trying to achieve the highest math score. So how can the focus in these conversations really be supporting that young person under those three domains? Anything to add to this, Allison, about any specific?
Yeah, I think just again to reiterate what Dylan was saying, again, maybe we're thinking more functionally and independently versus thinking as much about, again, like a math goal or something like that. And again, there will still be an IEP plan until the student graduates, but then there's also a transition plan that is really focused more on, again, their independence, functional goals, employment and independent living and all of those sorts of things. So you have a couple of things going on. And so I just wanted to clear that up. And I think the other thing too, and we may talk about this briefly at the end, but maybe we need to include it some way in here. But I was just thinking too, for families, one of the other things that we hear a lot about is, okay, so my my young person is turning 18 now, they're becoming an adult, and we need to start having conversations about, again, independence. What does that look like? Again, every family situation is different, and so am I applying for guardianship? Am I using supported decision making? Am we doing a combination, and having those conversations with our young person as well as they're approaching the age of 18? And will just mention now, I was going to mention at the end, but next month, our webinar is on supported decision making. So again, it's sort of a continuation of some of these conversations. And then again, as families are thinking about transitioning from high school into adulthood, that's another big piece to think about. So
Yeah, no, that's one of the most important pieces, I think. And we do talk about it very briefly here towards the end. But again, that's a conversation that, it can't be condensed to the few minutes that we give it here today. So we do invite you to come to our training next month on that as well. It'll be Allison and I again presenting, and we also have a webinar and a booklet for that as well. But kind of going back to the our young people here currently, in transitioning, this is always trying to think of, how do we support them? So in, jobs and careers, I think this is, so true today, more true than it was even a few years ago. But the world of work is rapidly changing. So that means different possibilities, different options that weren't even possible a few years ago. So there's now jobs that are more flexible. They can provide accommodations that really further break down those barriers to employment. And I think we've seen that really over the last few years in a shift into remote work. So that's been really helpful for this population. But just being mindful and being aware that careers are changing. That's opening up opportunities. So helping your young person be aware of what opportunities are out there that they might not know exist. And I'm going to share my example here, Allison. I think you know where I'm going. But when I was younger, I wanted to be a bus driver. Look at the time there, maybe I shouldn't be. I wanted to be a bus driver, and really that's because I wanted to travel. I wanted to meet people. I wanted to see the world. I wanted to essentially just drive that big machine. That was cool to me. I got a little older, had different experiences. I played a lot of video games and designing, so I wanted to be an architect. I wanted to create buildings. I wanted to design something out of nothing. I wanted to show people what the inside of my mind looks like. Later on, I get this type of work. I'm a youth coordinator. I'm developing trainings. I'm helping families access services. Nothing like a bus driver or an architect, but I get to do all those things that I love. I get to travel, get to meet people, get to create things like the training that you're seeing here. So think of your young person and how can you help have those conversations with them? So they might not know that that career that's perfect and fits their niche exists, but how can you help them find similar experiences that help them learn their interests so that then they can then pursue those interests when finding a career goal. And I think a lot of that work, happens at home, but that work can also be done with this agency here with vocational rehabilitation. So really what they do is, like I mentioned earlier, they help individuals find, prepare for, and keep employment. So they use all those interest inventories and they use that to build those experiences for our young people. So what they do is they create what we call an individualized plan for employment, and this is called an IPE. And really that plan identifies their different employment goals, supports, and how they're going to access them. These are all throughout the state. Each school has a vocational rehabilitation counselor. And if you've ever seen the Career Center offices also scattered throughout the state, they are also housed within those offices. So really this starts at age 16. But here in Maine, we also have pre-employment transition services. And this is where I mentioned earlier that we can start having these conversations slightly earlier, around the age 14, to help start getting ready for this conversation as they, reach the age of 18 and then adulthood. So really this opportunity, this program helps young individuals, learn what they want to do for careers.
can I just say something too, Dylan? Yeah,
Yes.
sorry. I was actually on Monday, I was at a meeting with Department of Labor and Voc Rehab, and it was really interesting to me that again, there are more employers that are because of the shortage, right? We need people to work in different jobs. And I think that there is a shift that's happening where employers are recognizing that maybe they need to think more creatively and that they're more willing to provide accommodations and modifications for, young individuals that need that. So I actually heard about a couple of new employers in the state that are employing people with different abilities and providing those accommodations. So again, we're ever changing, and I think the benefit here is that, again, we need employees. There's businesses that need employees, and I think they are starting to think more creatively and more willing to employ. So again, I think again, as families, doing your own research, but then also talking to your case manager and getting Voc Rehab involved to find out about what opportunities are out there and available to your young person.
And this is another video that I'm not going to play, but it's in the slides if you download them. This talks about an example of an older gentleman that utilized vocational rehabilitation. It talks about how he was able to utilize that service to start his own business, creating these outhouses that you see. So it talks about how they were able to set him up with a business plan, training, and the works to do that.
Thanks, Dylan. So again, I think the other really important thing to remember too is as things are shifting from children's services to adult services, they're completely different systems. So, making sure that you have an adult case manager that is familiar with a lot of these systems and the transferring or the piecing together of services can really be beneficial for families. They're much more familiar with adult services, the planning, the rules, the laws, and all of that. So it's going to be key for families. And also, again, as I mentioned before, an adult case manager is going to have more information about jobs that might be available or new companies and all of that kind of thing. So making sure that families are getting connected with an adult case manager that can assist with, again, transition planning, employment, guardianship or supported decision making, all of these types of things that families are facing as their young person's transitioning to adulthood. Clearing up some confusion if there's confusion. So we'll just talk about a couple of things. If a child is receiving Social Security, Maine Care, or Katie Beckett as a minor, these benefits don't just automatically carry over. The individual needs, once they become an adult, they need to apply themselves for Social Security and Maine Care. And if a child, again, turning 18, they need to, I already kind of mentioned this, Social Security, Maine Care, case management, as I just mentioned, and those adult services. Again, I think, sooner rather than later, not waiting till the 18th birthday and then trying to apply, but 6 months ahead of time, because sometimes these systems can take a little bit of time to get things in place. Again, not going to talk too much about this, but we have another whole training on this, and I think we're doing it in January. But SSI versus SSDI. Again, not spending too much time, but Social Security income is the federal program providing income to individuals who are older, blind, or disabled, who have limited resources. So a child who is receiving SSI prior to the age of 18 has to reapply. It doesn't just automatically happen. So they reapply based on their own assets or income. And I think a lot of times this comes up for families because they're worried that their young person is going to lose their benefits if they take a job. But there are certain protections in place, and there are benefit counselors that can help families or help the individual, work and continue to receive some of their benefits. So it's important to know that. And then SSDI is different. It's a program for adults who have become disabled and are no longer to work. So they've already worked and paid into the system. And so their income or their insurance, their benefit is coming from what they have paid into the system. So a little bit of a different program. But I think the big takeaway here is that, again, the young person has to reapply, even if they were receiving SSI as a young person. Thanks, Dylan. Again, so if a person is eligible to receive SSI, they are eligible to receive main care. However, they do have to apply for main care. So I think that's the other takeaway here. I think some families do know that, if a individual is eligible for SSI, that they're automatically eligible for main care, but there's still a separate process for applying in both. So again, applying to Social Security first and then applying to main care. And Dylan mentioned this in the chat box. I was vaguely mentioning them, but this is through Maine Medical Center, the community work incentive coordinators. So they really help individuals as your young person, again, is transitioning and thinking about employment and possibly taking on a part-time job. Again, how can they work and still continue to receive their Social Security benefit or continue to have main care for their health care or health insurance is important. So again, these are they don't help an individual apply for either of these things, but they are supportive and provide resources and counseling once somebody has been determined eligible for Social Security or main care.
And then shifting gears one last time, I'm going to give a very quick overview of supported decision making. But again, I want to invite you to our training that we're doing next month, where we're going to spend the entire time talking about supported decision making, as well as some of the other alternatives to guardianship. But really, I think this is important, at this stage, because this is a big question for families and for parents. So, like, what does the future look like for your family? So will your child be able to live independently and make responsible decisions? And what does that look like? So I think that's something that's probably in the back of all your minds here. So really just encouraging folks to understand what guardianship is, understand that it's not automatically granted to parents and it's obtained through a legal process. So by default, an individual approaching 18, at 18, they're their own guardian. So being aware of what that looks like and how to prepare for that, in advance, but also understanding what the alternatives to guardianship are, including supported decision-making. So to give a brief overview of what supported decision-making is, here in Maine, it is an alternative to guardianship, what we call one of those less restrictive alternatives. And it is a concept as well as, like a concept of thinking. So what that means is that really it's something that can be practiced alongside any other arrangement, but it's also recognized as a legal alternative. So it's based off the idea that we all ask for support when making decisions. And in supported decision making, it's about identifying the certain individuals in your life that can help you with certain areas. So within supported decision making, the individual is their own guardian. That's what we call the decider. And then we have other people providing support to them called supporters. These supporters are never convincing the individual or making decisions on their behalf, but instead they're providing additional information to the young person so that they can then be supported to make a decision on their own. So really their role is to help provide logical concerns and any new things that young person may not have thought about to them. So, everyone needs supports, and that's really at the core of supported decision making. So it's about identifying those supports and working with them. So within this, we have natural supports and paid supports. And those natural supports, those are really the people in your life already. They're the people that you love, your family members, your friends, coworkers, community, acquaintances, neighbors. They're the people that are there to support you because, they care. They're naturally in your life already. Individuals, on the other individuals, can also be included by paid supporters. And these are like the professionals that support a young person, throughout their assistance. And some examples of these are, school staff, therapists, employment services, job coaches. They're the individuals that are really paid to support an individual. About this, really what we think as a best practice, and I think in most successful, arrangements for our young people, is that natural supporters are the majority of the team, and those paid supporters, they should really supplement the natural supports already in place. So kind of thinking of it as, I like the graphic here actually, but thinking of, how do we use the paid support to really help assist and support the young person? And how do we identify those natural supports? So I've run into many experiences where many families say we don't have a whole lot of natural supports, but it doesn't take a whole lot either. And really just hoping that we can find a few good natural supports in a few certain areas to help support a young person. And one thing I always say to my young people is, how do you identify a good natural support? So who would you call in an emergency situation? And oftentimes you probably already have an answer, but that person, that individual that you answered, they're probably going to be one of your best natural supports. There's somebody that's already in your life and that you can reach out to. So that's just an example for sure. And again, I want to invite you to our training next month where we really dive into this within more detail. But before we head out, I did want to mention our Family Support Navigators. They're a great resource for families. If you are looking to have an extra support person, this
They
is
can be support, right? They can be
absolutely.
support, right?
And Allison, do you want to take it away for this piece?
Sure. So yeah, I was just going to say again, when we're talking about supports for an individual, our family support navigators can be a support for families. So basically, probably our most utilized program, how I got involved with Maine Parent Federation, how Dylan got involved. It's families who have navigated the different systems of care in Maine. We put them through a training program, and then they can provide one-to-one support at no cost to other families. So when a family calls up and they have a question or they're struggling with something, we can match them with a family that can support them through it. So some of the examples is they can help them locate services, provide information and resources, help them with paperwork, attend meetings, medical, school meetings, things like that. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it because I know we're just about out of time. But again, it's very easy for families to get connected with us. They're go to our website. Dylan's he included our email too if you want more information, but you can go to our website. And it's a very one-page application for a family support navigator, and we will quickly match a family. So again, a fantastic resource for families who really need that support.
Thank you, Allison. And again, find more information on our website there, explore that a bit. While you're there, feel free to check out our other trainings, events that are happening, and follow us on social media. We're pretty active on all of those as well. I'm going to drop in the link right now, our video to Jordan's story. And if this doesn't work, feel free to email me. And with that being said, I think once you all log off, we do have a quick survey and we would appreciate if you took the time to fill that out. I'm going to stop recording now. And if any of you have any questions that you'd like answered, Alice and I can spend a couple of moments to answer them off the recording as well. So
thanks for sticking with us. I knew it was going to be a long training and we were going to be trying to get it all in, and we did get it all in. But again, feel free to reach out to us if you have questions, or we can hang around for a few minutes if people have questions. Thanks for joining us today, and we will see you next month to talk about supported decision making.
thank you, everyone.
Everybody.